I'm skipping the intro to get right to the point. So, Chris Lucas says I'm in a false church because I say Daniel 8 is an Antiochus Epiphanes. Chris Lucas came to my chat with Eric the other day and he said Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 are fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes, but Jamie's heretical church denies this. So, I'll let you decide. Most commentators agree that the figure in Daniel 8 and Daniel has to be the figure in Daniel 11 for various reasons I won't get into. You have to take my word for it. You can look at it yourself. If you just read both chapters, you'll see what I mean, just from one reading of both. But there's many detailed reasons why this is the case, historically, whether you believe it's Antiochus or not, okay? So here's the problem with saying Daniel 11 and Daniel 8 are Antiochus Epiphanes, and that this is in the past. There's actually several reasons. But let me just read the text to you. Here's the end of Daniel 11. And by the way, you might notice that a lot of the language sounds like what is spoken of in the New Testament, because it is. This figure in here, Paul says is destroyed at Christ's coming, the brightness of his coming. Okay, so listen. It sounds like Armageddon. It sounds like the nations being gathered to Armageddon is what it sounds like. So listen. This is supposedly Antiochus Epiphanes, who died before Jesus was born. Okay? Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. This is Daniel 11, okay? Now remember, there's no breaks in Daniel with chapters. Those are added centuries later, centuries and centuries later. That was actually probably over 1,000 years later. I don't know, maybe not that long, but okay. So Daniel 8 on is the same language too. So there's no break in Daniel 11 and 12. It's a continuing narrative. Okay, there's no break there. It's a very unfortunate chapter break if you're not careful and you break it up in your mind. So I'm going to read from verse 36 in Daniel 11 into chapter 12, because there was no break. There is no break. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, like Daniel 7:25 you might want to check out, tying Daniel 7 and Daniel 11 and Daniel 8 together, and shall prosper till the wrath has been, all you have to do is read it. He shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. That might have implications for the pre-wrath, if you want to be weird about it. Till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. Who does that sound like? Nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign God, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. And at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as there never was a nation, even to that time. Does that sound like Antiochus Epiphanes' time? And at that time your people shall be delivered. What people? Daniel's people? Everyone who is found written in the book. Now, what else happens at that time? Where God delivers everyone written in the book. Everyone written in the book are delivered. And it's a time of trouble since there never was a nation. Sounds like Matthew 24. even unto that time. But your people, Daniel's people, the people of God, everyone found written in the book. Now, in case you're still not convinced, verse 2, the next verse. And many of those who sleep in the dust, by the way, many can be every person. The many who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, sea of glass, and those who turn many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Sound familiar? Maybe the one when in Daniel 8 where he says, because we're in chapter 12 now. When he destroys this figure, he says again here in chapter 12, just like in chapter 8, not till the time of the end. He tells Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on the riverbank. Oh. How long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? And he sees these figures, just like in Daniel 8, the time of the end. So the time of the end apparently is Antiochus Epiphanes' destruction at that time. So we see here again the angel telling him, shut it up till the time of the end. You're going to sleep, but you'll stand with your lot at the end of days. Blessed are they who come to the end of the long periods of time. You know why? Some people, if you think Antiochus is in Daniel 8 and Daniel 11, then you believe that, then you have to then say the time of the end was before Jesus was born. So it's not even 70 AD, essentially. But I don't even think he realizes this. I'm talking to you, Chris. You don't even realize this. This is why the preterists try to connect Daniel 7 and 8 to Daniel 9 and say it all ended in the first century. But that doesn't really work, because if the time of the end was when Antiochus was destroyed and Maccabees, that's not, Jesus wasn't even born yet. It's not, you can't even get to 70 AD. So now what are you going to do? You going to say the resurrection from the dead? It's one thing to be a preterist and say the resurrection from the dead was a spiritual resurrection, even though it's called heresy in Scripture, if you don't believe in a physical resurrection. I mean, how absurd is that? But now they at least say that happened in 70 AD, that Jesus, when he said, you'll see me coming in the clouds, the cloud rider from Daniel 7, and Jesus says, that's me, that's going to be me, the righteous judge on the council in Psalm 82. That happened in 70 AD. The world was judged. There's not a final judgment of wickedness in the world, apparently. At least the preterist tries to tie it to Jesus, the destruction of the era of the first covenant. If the time of the end was the Maccabees, it's absolute absurdity. So I think the figure in Daniel 7 and 8, as indicated by the details, is the same person, and it's talking about a figure through history, and there'll be a final one that Christ destroys at his coming when he resurrects people from the dead, literally. And that apocalyptic literature, like Daniel 7, most of Daniel 7 and 8, with symbolic beasts, just like the book of Revelation, has some symbolic meaning to it, but I take a consistent view that it's talking about history. My view encompasses Christian history. It won the new covenant. The fullness of salvation has come into view. And I say the apocalyptic literature is focused on Christ, his new covenant that calls back all nations to him. And it's describing the history of oppression, the one who oppresses it, that comes out of Rome, who says, I'm the vicar of Christ, who we know historically had thousands of people who believed in justification by faith murdered for not being under his authority, who says he speaks as God. In history, I gave the quotes in my video on why the Pope is the Antichrist. That man. And that the prophecies stretch down through Christian time, which is consistent with what we see in Daniel 2 that everybody agrees on. Long periods of successive kingdoms stretching hundreds and hundreds of years. My view actually has the apocalyptic literature focused on the new covenant, Jesus Christ, and the one who opposes him through history, who murdered. who calls himself God. And the final one, when he receives his deadly head wound, is healed again, and he merges again with the civil power and takes power of civil government, will be the final test for God's people. But if you want, you can pretend like the Bible doesn't teach a literal resurrection, I guess. And you can be willy-nilly with your time periods, which are historically false, as if the text didn't have original intention to an original audience, the Jewish people, so that they would recognize their messiahs, many of which did, which he established his church with. As the text indicates, the people were in expectation. They knew how long their years were. They knew they only had one Feast of Tabernacles per year, and that their years weren't 360 days long. If the years are to be reckoned with only having 360, even though we have biblical evidence, historical evidence, logical evidence that demands that's not the case. But if you adjust for that to 360 days per year, how many days of atonement were they in the 490 years? Because you're saying the years are different than actual. So you'd actually have like 3 more days of atonement if you had one per year, if you're rendering the days. Also, by the way, I'll mention, if the 42 months are the 1260 days, which is the 3.5 years, tell me, how do you get 42 months in 3.5 years? We know how they added a 13th month. I checked. I have that in other videos. There is no such thing as a 3.5 year period that has 42 months in it. It will have 43, according to the way they rendered the years. No 3.5 year period, no matter where you start it in Jewish history, will ever have 42 months in it. It'll have 43. And if you start it in the right place, you can have 44. But you can't have 42 literal months in literal 3.5 years. And you're saying they're literal days. I'm saying, nope. It's a day for a year. You can't have a 3.5 literal year. You can't have a 3.5 year period that's literal time that has literally 300 or 1260 days in it. It doesn't work. No 3.5 year period anywhere in Jewish history, as we know how they rendered them historically, archaeologically, logically, and biblically. We know how they rendered the years. And you can't get a 3.5 year period with 1260 literal days in it. So if you're demanding that the Bible is saying the interpretation is 1260 literal days, which is the 3.5 years, you have falsified prophecy because you're saying it's literal time. But we know there's no period that's 3.5 years that can equal 1260 literal days. Which means your view is false, or the Bible is, well, let's say inaccurate, but actually false, because you're insisting they're literal days, and you're saying that the time period doesn't actually have to be literal days. In other words, your own interpretation either falsifies your own view or the Bible. You choose. I'll choose the Bible.